Good day. My name is Mark Smith, and I'm the co-director of the Southwestern Institute for International and Comparative Law. The Institute is a division of the Center for American and International Law, or CAIL, as we call it. We're in the business of professional education, and we host programs primarily for lawyers and for law enforcement officials. It's my pleasure today to welcome you to this event, the second in a series of 6 Robert G. Storey Rule of Law lectures. Dean Storey founded CAIL almost 75 years ago when he returned home after World War II, where he had served as executive trial counsel at the Nuremberg war trials. He returned from World War II with the understanding that a peaceful world, a world in which justice prevails, depends upon the rule of law. And this lecture series celebrates Dean Storey's legacy and his commitment to the rule of law. Today's program will focus on challenges to the rule of law that result from poverty, powerlessness, discrimination, and misinformation. Our presenter is Hauwa Ibrahim, a world-renowned human rights and women's rights lawyer, and I may say, a 2000 alumnus of the Academy of American and International Law, which we sponsor. She will be interviewed by CAIL's new president, T.L. Cubbage, a distinguished American lawyer who most recently served as Deputy Undersecretary for Science at the Department of Energy. They will discuss today issues related to Africa and beyond. T.L. and Hauwa, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mark. Hauwa, thank you so much for engaging with us today. As Mark noted, CAIL, and thus the Southwestern Institute for International and Comparative Law, was born from the thoughts and the concerns of Dean Robert Storey. And the rule of law is a term often used but seldom defined. But in the 1950s, Dean Storey did give a lecture in which he discussed his understanding of the rule of law. And how I'd like to read Dean Storey's thoughts on the rule of law and ask for your reaction to them as a way to begin your presentation today. Dean Storey noted that the rule of law is deeply rooted in the concepts of freedom and of the dignity of the individual human being. And he added, quote, "It is an expression of principles whose end purpose is to minister to the community life of society, to remove the disharmonies that trouble it, to emphasize justice, and to strengthen the conviction that human beings are inherently capable of thinking and acting for themselves, provided they are given access to knowledge in general and to the particular facts relevant to any decision." And as we talk today, I'm interested in your reaction to Dean Storey's conception of the rule of law.
Thank you so much to the Center for American and International Law. Thank you to the Dean Storey family, if they are here. Mark Smith, thank you. T.L. Cubbage, President, thank you. J. Sue Bliss, staffs and members of the center. Distinguished guests, I am deeply honored and humbled to be speaking today. In 2000, I was one of the fellows that attended. That was actually my first time out of Nigeria to study. And I will answer your question, President. But before I do that, I want to also in absentia recognize Giuseppe Visconti, who was the person that introduced me to the center. I would like to go a little bit into memory lane. And I'm looking at my watch. I'll try to do that in 5 minutes, come to your question, and the sign is going to be a lot of conversation. 21 years ago, I stepped out of the shore of northern Nigeria to a foundation that was given to me by the center. They use the word freedom, Mark. There I found freedom. Freedom of thinking, freedom to recreate. And we can speak about that shortly. There was, a massive hospitality on arrival. We had host family. The content of the course, I still remember like yesterday. You gave me the foundation to go back home. I went back after 6 weeks, 8 weeks. I stayed about a week after. And there, about that time, the Northern Nigerian government, after a very long stint with military rule, had politicians coming to take over into democracy. And one of the governors was saying, if you elect me, I'll give you Islamic Sharia. And so in 2000, Sharia was introduced, actually October 27, 1999. And in 2000, I started practicing law. Now, I came into the practice of Sharia in this issue based on the foundation I got from from the center. I will speak to the case in Q&A if there is question around that. But you opened the door. You gave me the freedom to think. And that took me to another level of being recognized by the European Parliament. The European Parliament gave me the prize, Sakharov Prize for freedom of thought, which came with a lot of money. I later became an ambassador for Better Life for Rural Women, focusing on issues of environment, specifically biogas for better life. I moved on to become a secretary of a Pan-African Lawyers Union. Now, I'm mentioning this because I'm coming back to the issues that you asked, President. 50 countries and still counting, I have found my feet discussing either issues of law or issues that I have been passionate about in recent times, which is gender, justice, and law. In my sojourn in this 50 countries plus, I want to just mention here that Africa, which I would like briefly to share my screen for those people that could see. I will share my screen just to give an idea of what I wanted to communicate. So this is how big is a continent. So I am unable to speak to it because it's massive. You could see, just looking at a glance, you can take the United States, including Alaska, the China, India, Eastern Europe, and put it into the continent. You still have spaces around the continent. So it's massive. So this is how it looks like. It has 54 countries. This is Nigeria. We have over 200 million people. If you see the rose-looking flowers, the northern part of Nigeria that has adopted Islamic Sharia, which I will speak to when we speak about the rule of law. But I just want to point out something on this map. If you can see my cursor, I am taking it around and around and around. And when you go up completely, that is northern Nigeria. So when you look at the southern Nigeria, both the southeast, the southwest, and the south-south, is less than 1/3 of the country. So when I speak about practice, I'll be focusing on this larger region of the country. So I just wanted to point out that, just to put a context of what I'll be speaking to. But having said that, let me say three more things, and then I'll answer the question. Actually, maybe I should mention at this point that with the 54 countries in the continent with over 1.2 billion people, the laws and legal systems varies. In West Africa alone, and I taught West Africa at St. Louis University in Missouri, And during that time, I discovered that there's over 100 legal systems, mainly traditional. In Nigeria, specifically where I come from, we have at least 4 legal systems. And like I said, I will focus a little bit more on Sharia. 12 of the states, out of 36 states, adopted Islamic Sharia in 2000. And we adopted the 4th realm of the laws in the country of the legal system, which is the Sharia law. But to your question, and to the brilliancy of what Dean Storey was saying, the concept of freedom and dignity and principles of law itself, I posed the question, whose law? What law? What rule are we talking about? And to that, I have found over my years of practice that it is very interesting to put that in context. Like I said, it's absolutely contextual. But in the context of Sharia and the one that I have been more involved with of recent times, I look at it more from what is the law itself? And when we are talking and whose law, who make the law? And how is those law being applicable in people's life on a day-to-day? Is the law certain? Who interprets the law? Who translates the law? That's raised this issue of principles of law itself. And some of them, this is something that most of us know. No one is above the law, the general principle. But what about equality? What about the separation of law itself and separation of powers, the separation of religion and the state? I spoke about the certainty of the law. To a very large extent in practice, I found out that the Sharia itself that is adopted in these 12 states have 12 different codes. And it's not certain. Section 94 of the Penal Code, Sharia Penal Code law in Zafar State mentioned the uncertainty of that law. It says a judge can make any law provided the offense had violated the Sharia. But what is it? So making that provision of uncertainty sort of challenge that principle, the independence of the judiciary and the principle of supremacy of the Constitution. These are issues that are telling on one hand, but somebody say it in a better way, and I'll try to quote it. It said, the rule of law could be an empty vessel whose content depend on legal cultures and historical conditions that affect the application of the law and the practice. Now, I want to say the last few words, and I think we should go into more conversation. But how do I work within these difficulties of the definition of the rule of law? How did I do it? And in the Q&A, I'm sure we'll come to that. I could discuss a little bit of working within this milieu of laws and its rules and how I at times work within it and at times rebel against it and still sort of try to come back to it. But let me say in conclusion that the future of the rule of law will depend on equality and equity. And you mentioned knowledge. And I pose at some point to say, how do we think of knowledge that has no boundaries? And I think this is where we are leading to the last part of the question, when it has to do with information and misinformation. And I hope we can have time to discuss a little bit about that. How do we see knowledge as no boundaries? And how do we own it? And lastly, what communities are we building around these issues of law and its rules and its enforcement? how do we handle this heightened curiosity that we are right now facing, especially with younger generation? How do we radically imagine? How do we learn and unlearn and relearn? Finally, I was thinking about Ubuntu. I will speak to Ubuntu later, but I wanted to, conclude by saying the center had grounded me. The center gave me that freedom of thinking. And I told the story about coming from the northern Nigeria, and I was bred and born in village, and so there was the structure of learning is top bottom, and when you are in the class, you sit straight, no chewing of gum. You dare chewing gum, you go out to do some corporal punishment. You nail on hard stones, very sharp ones. Put your 2 hands on this in a hot sun, just to chew gum, just because you are chewing gum. And then I came to the center, and before I enter the class, there is this coffee machine, and you sort of grab the coffee and enter the classroom with a coffee cup. And you can even talk to the professor when he's speaking, He says something you don't like, you answer him back. You say, oh no, you didn't do it right. This is what I think. What a freedom. And I use the cup of coffee for me as my illustration of how I found freedom and how you have granted me as a center and send me to the world to become not only a global citizen, but to do good. I'll stop here, President, and I will continue with the conversation.
Well, thank you. It's very gratifying to hear that your experience with our Institute for International Comparative Law gave greater freedom to your thinking, as you say. But your learning, your education certainly did not begin here. It only continued here. And I think it would be helpful in the context of discussing your career for you to speak a little about the path of your education before you joined our academy.
So I was born and bred, like I mentioned, in a very tiny village that doesn't exist in the map. I became educated by accident because at the age of 11, I was given out in marriage, which is the culture in my village. I became a lawyer by accident, and I happened to go and teach at Harvard and other institutions, including Yale and currently at Oxford, by accident. So my education had accidental paths, but 2 things I want to say is that personally, I'm somebody that when you say you can do it, that's when I will do it. And so don't dare me to say you can't. So for me, education was that I can't be, and I said I want to. As you could hear from my first few minutes of remark, English is my 5th language. I never learned English in a classroom. I learned English by hearing people speak it, and I picked it up. And so I have a determination and resilient and insoluble appetite for knowledge that is unstoppable. So that is how my path started. And I ended up in a college in the center part of the country where I didn't know what law will do, and I entered in as a remedial student. I didn't have the qualification to come to college. I didn't pass English, so I wasn't qualified. And by the time affirmative action, a sort of affirmative action program that was happening in Nigeria at that time, make it possible for people from the north, where I come from, to get into a college with a lower grade, with a lower mark. So if the cutoff mark to enter is 250, they will allow us with 230 to come in. And so I came into college as an affirmative action student. And when I came in, I did a remedial program. And library was my best buddy. When they open the library, I'll be the first person to jump in, and they close the library, I'll be the last person to go. They have to chase me out. But that is my path to education. And when I became a lawyer, I always felt the need to give back. So if anything at all that has taken me from one level to another in my short career is the fact that behind my mind is the powerless. My own constituency is the voiceless, is the poor, is the illiterate. So those four group of people wake me up in the morning, wanted to sort of clean up and jump into action to see what good I can do for the day. And so that was what drove me into, partly I was invited to start the issues of Sharia, the cases when it came up in 1999. Like I said, it was introduced by politicians. We always had Sharia in northern Nigeria. So when the politician came, they said, we will give you a more updated sort of Sharia, but actually what they did was they introduced 5 new offenses into what used to be the penal code of northern Nigeria, which is if you drink alcohol, you'll be flogged 100 times publicly. If you commit adultery, adultery is lumped in as adultery and fornication, is called zina. And when you commit zina, you will be stoned to death. If you commit zina and you have not been married or divorced, you'll be flogged 100 publicly. If you steal, you have your limbs amputated. If you steal and you kill, you'll be crucified. This is the law up to today. And then the last one is you can't change your religion. So if you change, you commit apostasy, you also be stoned to death. So these are part of the laws that came in 2000. And that is how I jumped into defending the powerless, voiceless, and the illiterates. That was my constituency, and I was just giving back. Over the time, I have moved on after 10 years and defending this ones, moved on to, I had 6 death sentences on my head because I was tagged in my country and elsewhere to be anti-Islam and anti-Sharia. And so I got a fatwa to be killed. And I think the American embassy was very kind and generous to also pick that up. And so I was able to be invited to come to the United States much later in 2003. So yeah, and then from there, I went to American University, moved on to going back to Nigeria. I never wanted to be in the United States to stay because I thought people that needed me most are back in my country. So I have been back over and over again. And yeah, so that's my short narrative for now.
Well, it may have been an accident that you became a lawyer, but it was a very fortunate one for society. And you mentioned some of the attributes of the rule of law, including the importance of an independent judiciary. But I think another vital component of the functioning rule of law are brave advocates, those who will speak before the courts or the legal authorities, especially those who will speak for the poor, the illiterate, the powerless, and the voiceless. And your career has illustrated that role of the lawyer in upholding the rule of law. And in particular, I think I would be interesting to hear of upholding the rule of law in the context of Sharia through the prism of the particular case of Amina Lawal.
So when the Sharia came into being, there was certain things that happened that was sort of a little different, because imagine the United States and imagine the structure in the United States. So we have similar structure. So we came to the United States in 1979. We were a colony of Great Britain until 1960. And so when in 1960 we got the Constitution, we kept changing, and we had several changes until 1979, when we sort of adapted the United States Constitution. So we have the 3 arms of government: the judiciary, the legislative, and then the executive. So when we adapted, we tweaked a little bit, of course. So that is the structure of how the system works, but somehow we still adhere to rule of law. They are supposed to be, when the law was provided, the Sharia came into being, it was supposed to go through the House in the states because it's not a federal law, it's a state law. And they are supposed to pass one first reading, second reading, third reading, and then come to committees and then back to the floor and then enact it into law. So none of it happened. There was a haste. So when I say the Sharia law itself had an issue at the beginning, it has to do with even the compilation of it. So there was just a haste to put those 5 punishments in, boom, let's start beginning. And so there was, for us as lawyers trying to be ministers in the temple of justice, it was becoming like nearly impossible to minister with the code we had. And so we had to do several things along the way. I could speak to that in a moment, but let me focus right now on the law itself and its provision. It's important to also understand at this point that I, as a woman, am not supposed to appear before Sharia court or speak before the Sharia court. So that was one massive hurdles that I had to go through. But it was important also that I don't see myself as the issue because I had no voice. And lawyers must be extremely creative and think beyond the boxes. When I had no voice, I looked for a voice. It wasn't about me. It was about a woman that had been sentenced to be stoned to death. And so what I did was I formed the team. I was the most senior person on the team. And because we were all trained common law, the most senior lawyer introduced the team. So when I introduced my team, my name is Hauwa Ibrahim. May it please the judge, may it please the court. This are my, judge was like, oh, Hauwa, but there is a man there. Sort of just shut up and sit down. And when I realized that the court would not listen to me, I got a man to speak on our behalf, who is a junior counsel. And some of you that must have watched the event unfold, there is a 1-hour program on CNN, a 1-hour program on BBC. And it's called In the Name of Allah in BBC, In the Name of God in CNN. Something similar. So they followed us to court to see what we were doing. We never knew about their existence. And you could see me always passing the notes to the man to speak on our behalf. So it's important that we know the limit and see how we can be focused and stay focused. And my focus was a woman sentenced to death by stoning, and I'm using the law and its rule to defend her. That's my focus. And how I do it, it's contextual, and that was my context, and I work within it, okay? Of course, when we argued the case before when the ladies I defended over 150 cases, over 40 of them are women sentenced to death by stoning, and about 50 of them are children that have been sentenced to have their limbs amputated. So that was more the practice that I was known for, but I've done other things. But back to the case of Amina Lawal, the woman sentenced to death by stoning. When I knew that my voice could come in from one ear of a judge and go out to the other without anything sort of slowing it down, I decided that the man could be the voice, but above all, my madrasa, which is very important, and I mentioned it here, that every little experience we had in life comes around to make us at times who we are. So I was trained in the madrasa. I memorized the Quran without knowing what the Quran means. So my memory of the Quran was a massive game changer because it's easy for me to memorize texts. It's easy for me to memorize the Sharia code. And so when I come to court, I don't need to think through it. I can just say it. So I can always write it and send it around. And I became the go-to person because there were so many cameras, so many microphones. And you could see me jumping on my feet to answer a lot of jumping on my feet mentally, but sending notes physically. And then I became the face of the Sharia. when it was really on its peak. But that has to do with where I was coming from. So moving forward, we lost the case at trial. At the trial, she had no judge, so we were at the first appeal when we lost. We lost the case on the second appeal as well. And so when we went to the third appeal, which is the last appeal in the state, let me pause to say, Sharia, by the Nigerian Constitution under Section 10, Section 10 of the Constitution says there shall be no state religion. So because there shall be no state religion, I'm back to Section 1 of the Constitution where it says any law that is inconsistent with the Nigerian Constitution, to the extent of that inconsistency, that law shall be null and void. So to the extent of that, the Sharia, which is now a state religion, is in contravention of Section 1. So it cannot go beyond the state. And this is an issue that we are still dealing with right now in the country. Section 277 of the Constitution limited the application of Sharia to civil matters, marriages, divorce, children, inheritance. So it's limited. There's no criminal aspect of it. Now, what the state introduced was more criminal. So to a very large extent, we had to deal with that. But I will just end up by saying, because I want more people to sort of come in for the conversation, that in the work I did in all these 150 cases plus, we had a couple of things. The first is, when we get to court, we want to argue 4 things. We put on the table the issues of facts and issues of laws. Then issues of procedure. When we cannot succeed, we go to technicalities. So for the most part, these are our 4 directions. But I was a prosecutor before I became a defense counsel. I was a prosecutor for 8 years in the Ministry of Justice. I rose from defending road traffic cases to defending a culpable homicide punishable with death, which is the highest in the country. And my prosecuting background was an additional value. So in planning, I always have 4 strategic plans. Plan A, Plan B, Plan C, and Plan D. Plan A, I look at the case from a prosecution eye. So I prepare the case for prosecution. I put all my effort to see I am the prosecutor of this case. And I prepare the case for the prosecution. And then I prepare my case as a defense counsel, looking at the loopholes of the prosecutor, and then enhance my own case as a defense counsel. But just in case we fail in the second planning, what else do we have to introduce? Which is a strategic plan. And for me, it's how do we bring the court to the people and the people to the court? Now, these are new laws that was being introduced, so we introduce sentiment into it. When you see me writing, what about if it is your daughter? How will you have looked at this case? What about if it is your sister? And so we bring a bit of sentiment and the psychology of the court. We will now leave the realm of law and go into a different realm. And the last strategy is exit. It's very important for me to always have an exit plan because I'm always under death sentence. So the exit plan was important. So Plan A, case of the prosecution. Plan B, the defense. Plan C, anything you wanted to use for us for sentiment. And Plan D was an exit strategy. So that was basically how we had focused on most of the cases. But in conclusion on this aspect, let me mention quick the 7 strategies that I thought was useful for general strategies. The first one is, what is the dynamic? What is our dynamic when we get into any space? And I use it in the courtroom and beyond. And how do we learn to work within the dynamic? The for us was the law, was the judges, was the news system, was the society. How do we work within them? And when I say I rebel I leave the rule. I go into a different space, but to come back to the rule because I want the rule to rule the day, the rule of law. How do I do it? So working within the dynamics. The second is always to have a focus. We had massive media attention because of the Miss World competition, because of 9/11. But how do you keep the focus when they ask us, well, what do you think? This is Islam versus the West? Oh, this is clash of civilization? We don't know what is Islam versus the West. We don't know about clash of civilization. What we knew was a woman that has been sentenced to death by stoning. We are using Islamic law, not common law, to get her discharged and acquitted. That is what we know. How do we have a focus? How do we stay focused? Number three is, how do you become flexible and then firm? When it comes to this principle I mentioned of the rule of law, certainty, equality before the law, equal treatment under the law. We are not in the court to ask for equality, that we will lose and lose woefully. But we look for equality under the law, that the law is supreme. We cannot negotiate that. There is a separation of state and religion. And of course, there is separation of powers. The executive cannot make the law and still want to implement it, go through the court to implement it. There should be separation of powers. These are all part of the, when it comes to those principles, we are firm. When it comes to the society, we are flexible. So we can go to the society and identify who are our allies. Part of our allies are beggars. Now talk to that if you want to know about it more in the Q&A. So how do you become firm when it comes to the principles of law as a lawyer? And how do you also become flexible based on your own dynamic? What is our strength as lawyers? And I say to law students always, if you can, eat the law, digest the law, breathe the law, live the law. That makes you a strong and the go-to person. That was my strength. That was the strategy that we adopted. And that is what I keep, to it up to today. My strength is the law and its rule. And that is where I stand. That's my foundation. And I mentioned to you about planning. And lastly, let me say that what is the world? And I say, how do you think globally? And how do you act locally? It's very important that with whatever small corners we find ourselves, to know that there is something beyond that corner. And our ability to expand that knowledge of what we think we know. And I actually would say to people, especially my students, when you think you know, that is when you don't know. How do you go beyond knowledge? Beyond knowledge is wisdom. So move beyond that knowledge. Don't be comfortable with that knowledge. And that means to think, for lack of better word to use, global. But the important thing is to act within your dynamic, to act local, to act immediate, to act to do good. So these are part of what the strategies of what we use, what we did in court.
I'd like to, you've mentioned bringing the court to the people and the people to the law. And that dynamic of understanding that as a lawyer and an advocate, you're in a cultural milieu. And in your case, in addition to being the scholar who was at the library day and night, you also bring to your career your appreciation for Islamic culture. And I'm interested in hearing more about how that cultural sophistication has helped you, in not just in the courtroom, but in other dispute resolution situations.
I will quickly give you 2 examples, so hopefully it will take this to home point. I mentioned earlier on about who are the beggars in our society. You remember in some of where I come from, we didn't have any basic facilities. So there's no electricity, no road, no potable drinking water. It's just a typical village setting. The beggars are very powerful. And I want to mention this and pause a little for us to think. The person next to us may be the most important person we have yet known. And for us, the beggars were a massive game changer when we're doing the cases, and I think beyond also. Why the beggars? Who are the beggars? The beggars are the poorest of the poor in the society. The beggars are the people that goes from home to home every day in the morning to look for something to eat. They went to beg. We don't have radio or television, so they are the biggest informant in our society. Now, if you have them with you, you have one of the greatest allies. They know what is happening in the village much more than any other person, much more than even the chief of the village, much more than the chief of the police in the village, because they go from home to beg. So how do we look, and I was telling about knowledge and the beyond knowledge thing, how do we look beyond that to see what is it next to us that could make the game change, that would change the calculations? For us, the beggars did a lot. But let me end up with this narrative of the mullahs, where I was granted an interview to a BBC reporter, and the question was just one question. Is stoning to death in the Quran? And I was like, I don't, I memorized, I didn't see the stoning to death in the Quran whatsoever. And so it was played in the radio, which is the local means the North listen. The Northerners are very, very good listeners. And if you meet 10 Nigerians in the United States, 9.5 will come from the South. Maybe half will come as a half human being from the North. So we don't travel much and we are not too exposed, but we are extremely good listeners. So the radio is a means of communication to the North for the most part. So it was a radio interview. So it was played over and over against BBC, which is respected, Hausa, BBC, which is the local language I speak. And the mullahs had me on the radio and decided to answer me back on the radio. They called the reporter, told him that I was anti-Islam, I was anti-Sharia, and that is itself is apostasy. And so I'm also a candidate to be, my blood is required. It was not a pleasant time. And so I tried to get the reporter, and I had a number, called him severally, told him I want to see the mullahs. He said, don't even try that because he doesn't think it's a good idea. Finally, I persisted, and he introduced me to them. And they say they can see me, but they will see me in the mosque. I think for those of you that can see me, I think I'm dressed, but I'm not properly dressed enough to enter the mosque. So I was totally covered, my hands, my feet. And, I took the cases. Then I had 47 cases, made photocopies of them, went to the mosque to visit with the mullahs. There were 8 of them. By the time I was entering, they were sitting on the chair at the end of the hall. And I was walking, I saw a chair close to them halfway. And I just walked toward them. While walking toward them, approaching them, I knelt down and I sat on the floor. They were sitting on chairs. So they chorused at the same time, no, stand up, go sit on the chair, they said to me. I was looking down because by the culture, I cannot look at them on their faces. So I said to them, how can I, Hauwa, your daughter, sit on a chair when you, my fathers, are sitting on a chair? They were quiet for some time. And they said to me, oh, you have not forgotten your religious teaching. I said, You've not forgotten your culture. I said, But I came to the mosque because I wanted to, you remember the situation was I granted an interview. I didn't say a word about the interview that brought me to the mosque. I said to them, I'm a foolish lawyer and I'm a silly lawyer. And I am here before you because I felt I was trying to do something to defend this women and children, but I'm not sure I'm getting it right. I came to you because I needed your wisdom. And I came to you because I needed your knowledge. And they were quiet again. The conversation started. But 3 points I want to make here was humility doesn't hurt. And I knew the context where I was working. The men are men. The men, to some extent, are we revere them. When I entered the court, I didn't, the mocks, I didn't enter as a lawyer. I was in the mocks because I was entering deep into my heart, not putting any acting as their own child. And so when we humble ourselves in some situation, we could get ears for them to listen, and they listen. I spend more than an hour in the mocks talking to them. They listen. The second thing is sensitivity. We are sensitive to the place we are working. I couldn't have walked in not properly dressed because I would denigrate the space. So if we are sensitive to whatever we do, wherever we work, at times it does add value. It helps us to get some things done. So sensitivity was uppermost in my head. And the third is not only as their daughter without arrogance, I was not a lawyer, and their daughter, I had no any air around me, but to see how they could be the powerful tool that may help me navigate the cases. Now, they told me two things before I left. We had a very long conversation. They said to me, we would not officially or practically say we are for you to support what you are doing, but we will also not be against you. We will not speak against what you are doing. That was for me the most powerful statement during those times. If they are not against me, it means I can continue the cases. And today, I always look back and say that was the foundation to some extent during those times that helped me to go on as a lawyer to continue the case. So I don't know the dynamic of all of us listening and being part of this, but how do we understand it? How do we work within it? And how do we see the end game from the beginning? And if we can do that, that is part wisdom.
Your example is an excellent one of the ability, in some contexts, to use humility truly as power. And I know you've spoken on other occasions about another kind of power, of soft power. And I think you'll know to what I'm alluding. Would you speak to the soft power of motherhood?
So I have sort of moved on because it's like I mentioned earlier, I have insatiable appetite for knowledge. So if there's something new, nothing that prick my mind to so kick me in and the butts to go on to do something, it's just dull. So I'm always sort of looking for something that keeps me on and keep going. And like I said, I have been across maybe 30 countries in the world to teach, and mostly physically, but right now virtually. And I now zero down on a couple of things. I could see a future that I want to see 100 years from now, which is very silly. I want if 100 years from now, somebody dig my bones out from the grave and bring me back, and what do I want to see? So I'm trying to look 100 years from now and how can I start digging the foundation? I may not be able to lay anything on this foundation, but I want to start digging it. And part of the digging is my diversification of how do I use the knowledge I have gotten, the foundation I've gotten from the center. The space you gave me, not only space, which I didn't mention, was who you brought during my cohort. You gave me the world, so I could see the world then that was able to allow me to see the world now. And also all that sort of zero me down to a couple of things. And that is where I'll come with my soft power. So the first thing is, how do we slow down violent extremism? If you know, follow the issues in the northern Nigeria, there's a lot of kidnapping, a lot of Boko Haram terrorists and what have you. How do we slow down violent extremism? And how do we start it from the root? So this is one of the things I was involved with, I'm currently involved with, and this is a different conversation altogether. But when I left Harvard after 11 years, I didn't leave, actually, I still have a present at Harvard, but I was teaching at the Divinity School for 3 years. Shortly after I moved on, I started from Radcliffe to the Harvard Law School to the Divinity School and back to the Weather Head Center and then move on, but still in and out. I was invited back, and there was a magazine that was published while I was there, to Nigeria by the president of Nigeria to come help when they kidnapped the schoolgirls, about 300 of them in 2014, which was a big kidnap at that time, which is Bring Back Our Girls started then as a massive movement that Mrs. Obama was part of this massive movement as well. So I was invited back to Nigeria to help with the rescue effort of those girls. Because of I published a book on my work in the Sharia court, and I think they saw it because I know nobody in Nigeria. So anyway, I got there. And so they put us on the field to, they gave us terms of reference. They gave us 7 terms of reference and what we should be doing, how we do it. And so we went to Maiduguri, which is the capital city of the caliphate of the Boko Haram. And my mother comes from that area as well. And so we kept having the conversation at Maiduguri. We understood that drones have been given to Nigeria by United States, Great Britain, France, Israel, and so a few other countries. So then we had drones in order that we send the drones so that they could find where the girls are and then come back and feed us with information. We always have roundtable with the who is who in the intelligent community that were given to us to come and help us out. So we had this meeting on a roundtable over and over again. So all of a sudden, somehow inside of my guts, I felt maybe we could add something to it. So I went to the chairman of my committee, who is a general in the army, and I told him, I really think I need to do something. He said, what is it, Hauwa? So I said, I really want to go to visit with the mothers of these Boko Haram leaders, because we have gone to one of the camp, like a prison, it's maximum prison, where they have kept some of the leaders they have captured. And we have had a conversation with them, with top securities around. And so I said, I want to see their mothers. So the chairman said, no, this is not part of our terms of reference, you can't do that. So I was like, really, just allow me. So of course, you know, by now I persist when I want to do something. So I keep persistent. And he said, if I want to go, I can go, but it's not his responsibility, whatever happened to me. And it's very far, it's very dangerous, it's very deadly what mission I want to take, but I felt, you know, I want to do that. In the past, I was a police officer, which I didn't mention in the introduction, but the first training before I worked in the Ministry of Justice, I worked for the police and I worked for the Bureau for Intelligence and Investigation. But I also went to police school and I came out with ASP, Assistant Superintendent of Police. So anyway, so my colleagues are now high in government. And one of them is the Commissioner of Police in the state, which is the head of the police of the state. And so he gave me cover to go. So I went to the villages, I spoke to some of the mothers. I first went to the prison, this maximum prison, and asked for their first information report, we call it FIR. I read through them, identified who I wanted to see, went to the village, follow through the structure of the village, because you just don't go into a village, there's a structure to go in and to speak to who and who speak to who and who speak to who before to get to the mothers. So we did all the protocols. I am from that area, so I know how to get it sort of done. I know the culture. So I was able to speak to the mothers and finally got 4 mothers to come with us. And through the same structure, they convinced them to come with us. We are harmless. So we came to the prison, this maximum facilities in Maiduguri, in Malari, that's the name of the place. So we slept first in the, because it's a very long trip, so we had to sleep in the hotel. They have never left the village, so everything for them is different. It's a different conversation. So anyway, we were in the prison in the morning, and we sat on the floor on the mat, and the men were sitting, of course, on the chairs at the offices and the office of the two ICs. So would they call in the first Boko Haram leader to come? So he came, but you have to understand that in our culture, when a boy is about 10, he's told he's going to be the head of the house, so he is trained to be the man. And that means you cannot hug a woman. Even if it's your mother, you cannot hug her, because now you're supposed to now take responsibility now. Don't cry, cry is not part of it. So anyway, this young man, maybe about 25, 27, saw his mother sitting. He could see something that looked like her. Then he started running as if his life depended on it, ran toward her. In the meantime, he had been in detention for over 3 years. She thought he was dead, because 3 years after, she thought he died. And he thought nobody cares, nobody wants him. He has already joined this, so he's gone. So when he saw her and ran to her, he fell on her and held her so tight. And she used 3 words. She told him in Hausa, Meya Faru, something like, what went so wrong? And before you say Jack Robinson, he was, now in their own detention facilities, when you say torture, maybe there may be a word to explain it, to extract information. They tortured them. No, none of them has given no information. 3 words from his mother got him speaking. Everybody rushed to get their phone to record what he was saying, and their tape recorders. And it was then it dawned onto me about the soft power that resides in the matter. Not the drones, not the Apache helicopters, neither are the tanks or the AK-47 or the APC, the one that you shoot to bring down the airplane. None of them. It was that soft power that brought out some information. And that information was later used, and subsequently, later over 50 of the girls were rescued because of the same strategy of using mothers to get to their son, to be able to give information, to be able to rescue the girls. And I think up to today, despite the Nassan's kidnapping happening, mothers have become a very big player, and that soft power is changing some perspective of the villages and how security agent deals with issues of insecurity and terrorism. So yeah, so this is one of the narratives of my soft power.
We're coming to the top of the hour, but you may have called yourself once a foolish lawyer in a mosque. But when it comes to upholding the rule of law and the pursuit of justice, or finding effective ways to combat extremism, you have proven yourself to be anything but a foolish lawyer. We're so grateful for your time with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. Like I said, you gave me the wing to fly. I am not sure if my trajectory could have been the same if I haven't had the opportunity to get that freedom and the cup of coffee. And for everybody listening and watching, I want to deeply say how grateful I am. Everybody is out there doing some good. Whatever we sow, we will reap it. And whether we reap it now or our generation yet on board will reap it, we will reap it. So I hope we keep sowing what is right and we will reap what is good now and for the times to come. Thank you so much. And thank you.
Well, thank you. And as someone who has come through the center, you are a very fine example of all that Dean Storey sought to achieve. in founding this institution. So thank you. We're proud to be associated with you.